Alright, before you leave a dislike, the point of this video is to have a logical discussion about mouse and keyboard, is it dead on Apex Legends? I'm sorry, it's a bit of a bait title, but even if this was the other way around, we would still be having this conversation if Roller was at risk. After watching, please comment. I promise commenting early. I may have already mentioned what you're going to talk about, but I also hope this video is taken seriously as a place of good feedback. Some stuff requires a more in-depth conversation, but I'm going to try to do my best to go high level on these concepts. If you're expecting a rant video on this topic, I'm sorry, but the point of this video is to have a logical discussion to ensure that Apex can maintain a strong M&K presence. Not a dominant one, but still showcase some M&K presence, because we are starting to see individuals move away from mouse and keyboard. Alright, before we just talk about mouse and keyboard, let's break down some things that controller player base absolutely needs. So first, the ability to move while looting. I think this one is long overdue, and it's one thing that gets mentioned a ton. I just feel like all control players need it at this point. 2. Providing control players the ability to remap to different buttons to enable the ability to do movement tech like mouse and keyboard. This does need a more in-depth analysis, but to simplify any movement tech a M&K player does, a controller player needs accessibility to do as well. So overall, each movement tech should be analyzed and reviewed to ensure that both inputs can do it fairly. Now let's discuss the problem that most mouse and keyboard players are already facing. We're in the minority. Already, if you look at the overall player base, it's naturally controllers. Xbox players, PlayStation players, Switch players, then assuming PC players have a natural split of M&K versus controller. M&K being, of course, the more dominant one. So organically, we're going to have a majority of players on controller, just based on easy assumptions here. So let's go on to the next topic that is occurring. What the pros are utilizing. The bigger concern is more pro players are starting to switch to controller, and while we assume most players on PC are mouse and keyboard, having even a percentage switch to controller starts to sway the PC player base. We ask the question, why are they switching? Well, the consistency of controller close range for the time of mastery is naturally going to be lower, when winning close range encounters has an overall strength when it comes to Apex Legends. Remember, controller players do suffer in long range encounters, which is also important in competitive, but most pros are able to put in the time to obtain consistency here as well. Now here is the more controversial take. Aim assist is not exactly the problem. I've seen so many controller players claim my aim assist does not do that. Well, the only players who are able to truly take advantage of aim assist are the pros due to their game sense, positioning, and knowing where and how to master aim assist, which is why it's going to segue to a poorly made graph in a moment to discuss. But that is truly a small group of individuals. What I see being sold out more at Walmart and GameStop are items like the Cronus Zen. When paired with aim assist, these peripherals are closing the gap and are skipping the skill gap to improve. This is bluntly called cheating. Skipping the hard work through a peripheral doing it for you. Most will claim they buy it for the extra buttons or accessibility. But the problem is that it is just available to you, and when people get frustrated due to lack of progress, they cheat to take those extra steps forward. My opinion is that outside of actual pros or seasoned players of Apex, is that it makes it very hard to tell the difference of what is the actual sole problem. Is it these extra peripherals that are making it easier for aim assist to really be dominant? Or is it because the pros at the tippy top are mastering it? Please comment down below what you would want changed on aim assist, because I don't necessarily have full knowledge or understanding of it. I do know that in some scenarios that we're going to break down later that it has its strengths. We're going to break that down, I promise. But to circle back here, this is skewing the data, in my opinion. If we pull up all the numbers, we don't know how much is making it seem like aim assist is the actual problem. Meaning, does it need to be buffed in certain scenarios, or where does it need to be nerfed? Now let's talk about what can consistently happen with mouse and keyboard versus controller based on time. Remember, there are outliers. Okay, meaning that there are individuals that can master a certain range or put extra time or just happen to have a certain skill set that can provide mastery over something that may be difficult for others. So we have to speak more general here. I'm obtaining this information based on my own experience in mouse and keyboard, but also the choice of peripheral changes over the years. Now, in this portion of the video, what we're going to do is explain the skill, which is S on the left, at the bottom, time, blade. Explain the skill expression of controller versus mouse and keyboard. This is not the perfect drawing, and remember, we're going to speak more general because, of course, there's always somebody that can have a different graph, but I want to try to explain this in more general terms. In red, I want to explain more mouse and keyboard. Most individuals, whenever they hop in, I felt mouse and keyboard at the start of Apex Legends journey Now the skill requirement, the amount of skill they have. So this is meaning the amount of skill that they have to win more encounters. I believe at the start that mouse and keyboard had a bigger spike. So I want to say even a bigger spike would be a little more realistic, where maybe they're here, but the problem is that they kind of plateaued. And when it comes to mouse and keyboard, you're going to have natural ebbs and flows. And then towards the end, we don't know this answer yet, because we could say this is year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, and then year 5, and then onwards. Now, the interesting part is that controllers, I don't think were as dominant early on, and everyone always looked at mouse and keyboard, especially the pro players, as a more dominant peripheral. But what was interesting is over time, while maybe they had a lower start and weren't as strong, spiked up a little higher and also had this ebb and flow. And then the question is now, are they next to each other? Are they not? I feel like maybe we need to redo this one here, because I feel like it spikes, but maybe not as early, because it does take a little bit of time. And this is why this graph is not perfect, right? And then where maybe they have the same ebb and flow, but we don't know, because maybe controller right now needs to be a little higher, maybe needs to be a little lower. We don't necessarily know per se until later. And so I want to ask the question, when does mouse and keyboard start to take off, or when do they see the same adjustment? And of course, this can change based on meta, and this can change based on time spent and maybe your own skill expression. But again, I think the most important thing that I'm trying to highlight here, based on what I saw early on in Apex, is being a day one player, that mouse and keyboard was stronger, but then it didn't necessarily go up as much for these players. Maybe it didn't have this same plateau, maybe it was more incremental, maybe a lot slower, or controller players had more consistency, maybe didn't have this, but had a more linear graph. Now, improvement in skill is not linear, by all means, but I felt like this intersect happened, and maybe it happened later. Maybe we could say it happened a little later around here, or it intersected, right? It's just an example. I hope that you understand this is just an example, a broad visual of where we say, where is M&K versus controller in terms of skill and the amount of time. Now, it doesn't mean that the amount of skill you personally have, but it means of the amount of time. Not saying one is easier or harder than the other. It's just kind of looking at what naturally occurs. And like I said, maybe mouse and keyboard at the end of this graph spikes up and then will beat controller players. I don't really know. That's where we're trying to have some theory and discussion debate. So I'm going to segue back to the normal video of what we're discussing, and I hope that this kind of helps lean in the conversation. I hope that my graph wasn't too embarrassing or bad. And if it was, I do apologize, but I hope that it provides at least enough general information for us to keep the conversation going. And I want to kind of think more like this, like a graph. And I hope if anybody from Respawn does watch this, we're asking the question of where is that healthy balance, right? Let's segue back. Now let's discuss what mouse and keyboard players need to succeed to counter the problem of controller players. One common concern is visual clutter. Aim assist can still persist through things that can blind a mouse and keyboard player. Unfortunately, on mouse and keyboard, when you lose track of a target, you cannot feel out where they could be. Sometimes in pro settings, we have seen where aim assist was able to even find a rat due to their natural pull. The overall request here would be to lower visual clutter, or the ability to adjust it in its settings to be more competitive. I know some will argue that it is immersive, which is why I'm offering a setting suggestion for those looking to be able to see their target or have the option to switch to it. Now let's discuss the reality here. Mouse and keyboard players and controller players are going to have their strengths and weaknesses. Controller ideally close range, mouse and keyboard long to mid range. Individuals will be able to outskill those specific ranges like we mentioned. The question additionally, what areas are fair outside of ensuring movement skills are done by both, and each have a fair opportunity to outskill each other. To be blunt, my biggest fear is the games are going to the wayside of Call of Duty, where the superior input is just controller. I don't know any game that is going to try to achieve this balance of mouse and keyboard and controller. I'll give some examples. Valorant and CS are just mouse and keyboard. Overwatch has a stronger mouse and keyboard presence. Tarkov has a stronger mouse and keyboard. PlayerUnknown Battlegrounds, stronger mouse and keyboard. Now, on the other hand of things, we talk about Call of Duty. Definitely more controller dominant. Halo, more controller dominant. Destiny, I believe, is more controller dominant. Then lastly, XDefiant on the controller side. Maybe controller, it's a new title, it's kind of hard to tell, but based on what I was looking at streamers and who's playing, it seems to be more controller dominant. We could argue that Rainbow Six Siege is a popular title that can be performed by both inputs. I unfortunately know less on this title, but looking at the Steam charts versus console, the numbers seem pretty close. So I have to ask that maybe this is more like Apex Legends type of problem. Now the question is, Apex Legends leaning more controllers, but can it be the first to create that balance? Some would argue it's impossible. that crossplay just does not belong, but I remain optimistic. And maybe I'm being unfair by wanting another M&K base game, but what I'm hoping for is more just balance between the two peripherals. I don't mind having controllers exist as long as we try to strike a fair balance where one side isn't arguing against the other, besides the natural inherent strength of one or the other. I know there's smaller details we're missing here in the conversation, but I hope overall this covers a majority of the conversation to spark a debate in the comment section. Also, lastly to highlight here is Apex Legends' recent balancing. I believe this is to help more mouse and keyboard by removing the digital threat, moving more towards shotgun AR meta, balance the power of the SMG, which is more powerful on loadouts such as controller. So things are helping. I apologize again if the title is a little clickbait, but I'm seeing this become such a bigger debate and it's popping up, and I do see it impacting even what people are searching for based on Google search results, algorithm. Everything is starting to sway a little bit of controller, and it has me concerned as I am a mouse and keyboard player. Now, if this was on the other hand of things and I saw controller players start to disappear, I would also mention the same thing because that's also just as concerning. I think it's important to have a healthy debate and have this before it creeps up on us and surprises us before we see the tombstone of mouse and keyboard. Let me know if you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. And of course, I'll see you guys all in the next one.